Hey everybody, this is Ms. Harris. I'm going to do some book talks about narrative nonfiction books that are available in our eRead Illinois collection. If you need to know how to use eRead Illinois, check out some of my other tutorial videos. These books I'm going to talk about today are all print ebooks that you can read on your screen. They are not audiobooks that you listen to, so keep that in mind. The first book is called Fanny Never Flinched, and it is the true story of a teenager named Fanny Sellens. She lived during the Gilded Age of American industrialization. That's back when like the Carnegies and the Morgans and the Vanderbilts were wearing jewels and living in mansions. But the laborers and the workers were wearing rags and living in tenements. So Fanny was a dreamer, and she dreamed that America could achieve its goals of equality and justice for all. And she kind of sacrificed her life to help that dream come true because Fanny became a union activist, and she helped to create the St. Louis, Missouri Local 67 of the United Garment Workers in America. She became famous for her work, and she traveled the nation and eventually did give up her life, calling for fair wages and decent working and living conditions for workers. And her accomplishments live on today. We still have unions. So if you've never really known what a union is or what it does, this book is a good look at that. The next book I want to talk about is also a piece of American history. About 75 years ago, our American government did something that most of us would consider unthinkable today. It rounded up over 100,000 of our own citizens based on nothing more than their ancestry. We were suspicious of their loyalty, and so our government put them in concentration camps for about 4 years, right here in America. How could this have happened? Read Unrooted to take a closer look at this history of racism in America and the treacherous path that led one of our nation's most beloved presidents to make this unusual and unprecedented decision. Our next book is called Marooned in the Arctic. In 1921, 4 men ventured into the Arctic for a top-secret expedition. They were attempting to claim the remote and uninhabited Wrangel Island in northern Siberia. They wanted to claim it for Canada. And along with the men was a 23-year-old Inuit woman named Ada Blackjack, who had signed on to be their cook and seamstress because she needed to earn money to care for her son. But the conditions in the Arctic soon turned dire for that team. Their rations ran out. It got colder and colder. They were unable to kill enough wildlife to survive. So 3 of the men tried to cross the frozen sea to go and get help, but they were never seen again. This left Ada with the one remaining team member whom she cared for. He was ill, but he did die. And so Ada was alone. But she was determined to be reunited with her son, so she had to learn to survive all by herself in this icy world. She learned to trap foxes and catch seals and avoid polar bears. She taught herself to shoot a shotgun and a rifle. And after Ada was finally rescued in August of 1923, she had been in isolation on that island for 2 years. And upon her return, she became an instant celebrity. This is her story. The next book is a World War II story. It's called Symphony for the City of the Dead. In September 1941, Adolf Hitler's army had surrounded Leningrad, Russia, and it was to become one of the longest and most destructive sieges in Western history. And a siege is when you don't let anything out of a place and you don't let anything go in. And so after about 3 years of bombardment and starvation and harsh winters, it finally ended in early 1944. But by that time, more than 1 million of the citizens had perished. And this is the story of the survivors, and they remember corpses littering the frozen streets, and their relatives having neither the ability or the strength to bury those people. The residents had to burn books and furniture and even the floorboards of their houses to keep warm. They ate their family pets, And eventually, some of them had to eat each other just to stay alive. They were trapped between the Nazi forces that were invading and the Soviet government itself. And this is the story of a composer that was there. His name is Dmitri Shostakovich, and he would write a symphony about this time that roused and rallied and eulogized and commemorated his fellow citizens. And it was called the Leningrad Symphony, and it became a prominent piece of music in the victory. And this is the true story of that city under siege. The triumph of the bravery and the defiance in the face of absolutely terrifying odds. So, music can be very powerful in our lives. The next book is called Drowned City. This one hits closer to home. This one's in America in 2005. Hurricane Katrina hit the south coast of America, and those absolutely monster winds and surging water overwhelmed the protective levees around New Orleans, Louisiana. And New Orleans is a very low-lying city. And so about 80% of the city was completely flooded. And in some places, it was under 20 feet of water. Property damage across the Gulf Coast was over $100 billion. 1,833 people lost their lives. And this is the riveting story of this historic storm and the drowning of an American city. And it's really a story of selflessness and heroism and courage, but also incompetence and racism and criminality. I think in stories like this, you see the worst of humanity, but also the best. I couldn't resist throwing this book into the mix. It's called Chocolate: Sweet Science and Dark Secrets of the World's Favorite Treat. And it's a fascinating account that captures the history of chocolate, the science of chocolate, and the economic and cultural implications of harvesting cacao and how chocolate is created. So, if you like chocolate as much as I do, you will enjoy this behind the scenes look at the impact it has on our world. I will always write back how one letter changed two lives. This is the true story of an all American girl and a boy from Zimbabwe, and the letter that changed both of their lives forever. It started out as a school homework assignment. Everybody in Caitlin's class in America was supposed to write to an unknown student somewhere in a distant place. And she chose the country Zimbabwe off the board simply because she thought it was unusual. Martin was really lucky to even receive a pen pal letter because there were only 10 letters sent to his school and there were 50 kids in his class. But he was one of the top students, so he got to choose. And that letter was the beginning of a correspondence that spanned 6 years, and it changed two lives. And I don't want to say anything more just because it's so interesting to read how it changed them. But I do think one of the cool things in this book is that the chapters switch back and forth as Caitlin and Martin each tell their side of the story. This next book is also a book that deals with a letter. It's called Discovering Wes Moore, and it's the story of the other Wes Moore, the one that the author, whose name is Wes Moore, couldn't get out of his mind because he had learned that there was another boy with his name, just 2 years his senior. And this boy had grown up in the same Baltimore neighborhood as Wes. And so Wes wrote to that boy, who was now a man, and he wrote him a letter, and he did not expect to receive a reply, but a reply came, and a friendship grew, and the letters turned into visits, and the two men got to know each other, and eventually that friendship became the inspiration for discovering Wes Moore, which is kind of a moving and cautionary tale examining the factors that contribute to success or failure and the choices that people make that can make all the difference in your life. The next book is called Passenger on the Pearl. Have you ever wondered what daily life was like for American slaves? I have when I've read the history books. Well, this book is a page turning, heart wrenching, true story of one young woman who was willing to risk her safety and even her life for a chance at freedom in the largest slave escape attempt in American history. So, back in 1848, Emily Edmondson was 13 years old, and she, along with five of her siblings and 70 other enslaved people, boarded a ship called the Pearl at night, and they were hoping to sail to the north to freedom. But within a day, their schooner was captured, and the Edmondsons were sent to New Orleans to be sold into even crueler conditions. And so the book tells the true story of the Edmondsons, the whole family, and all the others that were involved. And it kind of traces their lives from that ill fated escape to the slave auctions, back to the Deep South, and then finally to freedom. And what I really liked was the book has plenty of maps and photos and sidebars and illustrations, so it's super interesting. I think you'll like this one. And the final book for this book talk is called The Family Romanov. It's about Russia's last czar, who's kind of the king, and his name was Nicholas II. And he inherited the throne in 1894, but he was really unprepared. He had a wife named Queen Alexandra and four daughters, including one you may have heard of. Her name was Anastasia, and he had a son. And they really the whole family buried their heads in the sand, not really paying attention to what was going on around them. They were living a life of opulence and luxury. And then World War I was raging outside their door practically, and the political unrest in Russia was growing. And so this book flips back and forth between the rich lives that the Romanov royal family was living and the plight of Russia's poor peasants, and how the peasants eventually staged an uprising. It's a really fascinating account, and again, it's complete with plenty of photos and maps and more. And history really doesn't get more interesting than following the story of a royal family. These are the Romanovs.